So today's lecture is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to show anything in code, but I just wanted to go over again how the .NET framework fits in to our coding here in C Sharp. So let's just kind of start back at the beginning. So .NET, the whole purpose of it was Microsoft saw this, um, you know, hole in the industry where Java was taking over, but their languages were falling behind, so they needed something to compete in that area. So mobile devices, the web, backend, and just more advanced graphics for their user interface. And so they came up with .NET framework. And the .NET framework is just a whole bunch of libraries that they put together. So like buttons and labels and windows and the math class and all those things are all thrown into the .NET. It's just all those libraries that they've written for you. And so just kind of again, it's good to understand the history lesson behind the .NET framework. So back in 2002, they started with version 1.0. I actually was at Weber State back in 2002, and I took the first class taught at Weber State on .NET. And so I've been there since the beginning. And then every year or so, they would come out with new versions, and they would just continually add on features all the way up to the last version, which is 4.8. Now, again, it's good to understand, the history of these things that came out, and so you can kind of understand maybe what's coming in the future. So, for instance, .NET Framework 1 came out in certain versions, and then .NET 2 came out, and this was just a major advance here, because you can see .NET 2 added on Windows Forms, ASP.NET, ADO.NET, and then again a lot more of the common language runtime and framework class libraries. Then 3.0 came out, was the 2006. That's when WPF, the Windows Communication Foundation, came out. The Windows Flow, workflow, and card space. These things aren't used that much anymore, but these are. And then again, 3.5 came with Link and Entity Framework, and then 4 talked about parallelism, and then 5 kind of got a little more asynchronous APIs. And so they just continually made the language better and better over time. So they got to a point where they started realizing in the industry that they needed to start creating a language more for games, and they need more for the mobile applications like this right here, more applications built for the cloud and Internet of Things, and all this different platforms where the .NET framework couldn't be used on all these different frameworks. You had to, if you're coding for the web, you were just coding for the web. You couldn't also use that same code for the mobile and these other things. So they decided to come up with what was called .NET Core. And when .NET Core came out, its purpose was to, so you could just use the .NET Core and you knew it would work across all of these platforms. However, if you chose .NET Core, it wasn't used very well for Windows because it took away a lot of the features, because there's some things that just you can do on Windows, but you can't do on mobile. Certain things with accessing file system, and just certain things like that. And so what happened is they actually started going two different paths, where they created the .NET Core in one path that we can kind of see going on here, and then in the other path they continued with these other versions of the .NET framework. So they were actually doing them in parallel, and this created all kinds of confusion. And eventually, they said, fine, enough of this. We've got to get rid of these two code bases, and we sort of have to combine these two together. And so as of the .NET Core, I guess you would call it version 5, they actually got rid of the core of it, and they just started calling it .NET 5. And so that's what you kind of see right here. And currently we're on .NET 6. And so now, in the future, you don't have to worry about selecting .NET Core or the original .NET framework. It's just called .NET now. I apologize. It confuses me, and I've been using this for 20, 30 years. It's just the way it is. And so that's why, again, I'm creating this lecture, so hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So again, once they came out with .NET 5, they integrated the .NET framework and the .NET Core, and now it's just one framework going forward. And they call it .NET, or you'll hear .NET Standard. But again, what's nice about this is if you choose, you can have one language, one set of code, and you can program to multiple things. You can program to the web and the mobile or the desktop. Now again, it gets tricky if you want to target, multiple endpoints like this with the same code base, but that's what .NET is trying to promote in the future. Because just again, imagine in the past, you had to code specifically for the desktop, you had to code specifically for the web and mobile and gaming, and you were able to create libraries, but again, it wasn't the same code base. So now, hopefully, you can just maintain one code base going forward. So just keep that in mind. So in our class, let's kind of show you what that means for us. So when you go to create a new project for C Sharp, again, this is where it gets a little bit confusing, and I apologize, but this is kind of the way it is. So for instance, if you're trying to do a Windows form, you have two choices. A Windows Forms app, and you'll notice it says .NET Windows Forms, or a Windows Forms app .NET Framework. Again, it's confusing, but this is the .NET Core-ish, right? This is the new framework going forward, and this is the old framework. You'll be fine doing either in our class, but I would recommend using the latest and greatest. So if you were to click on Windows Forms app, and I click next and click next again, you'll see right here, here's where it's allowing you to select the different versions of .NET Core, or again, remember 5 is when it combined, and now we're currently on .NET 6. Or if I were to come back in here, instead of the .NET, I came into the .NET Framework and click next, you can see that it's all the old versions of the .NET Framework that I can target. Our class will work both ways, but again, I would recommend just using the Windows, the .NET version. So now if we scroll down, I want to show you again the same thing for WPF. So you can see it says .NET WPF application versus a .NET Framework application. And it'll be the same thing. As you come in here, you can see there's .NET 6. And that just means you're creating that .NET 6 for the .NET Core. And when you create it, and I'll create this application really fast just so you can kind of see the difference, that up here, especially in this dependencies, it's going to look a little bit different on the way they show you everything. You can see here's the frameworks, here's that .NET Core app, and then they include some other libraries and then you can come in here and add frameworks. You can right click and do the same thing you could in the old .NET libraries. So hopefully that makes that clear as mud. You'll just have to kind of use it a few times, maybe read up on the internet about the different versions and just kind of understand the history, and hopefully it'll sink in. Thank you.